editor, Anthony Whittam, for the meticulous care he has taken in turning it into a printed book, to Anne-Marie Ehrlich for once again assembling illustrations, to Alan Gilliland for devising and drawing the maps, to Francis Banks for typing from my increasingly difficult handwriting, and, as always, to my literary agent, Anthony Shiel, a friend of 30 years. I particularly wish to thank Andrew Orgill and his staff at the Central Library, Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, one of the great military libraries of the world, to which I am lucky enough still to be allowed access, the staff of the Ministry of Defence Library, and the staff of the London Library. I owe personal thanks to many friends at the Daily Telegraph, including Conrad Black, Max Hastings, Tom Pride, Nigel Wade, who arranged for me to visit the Gulf in November 1990, and Yugoslavia between the Croatian and Bosnian wars, Peter Armand, Robert Fox, Bill Deeds, Jeremy Deeds, Christopher Hudson, Simon Scott Plummer, John Coldstream, Miriam Gross, Nigel Horn, Nick Garland, Mark Law, Charles Moore, Trevor Grove, Hugh Montgomery Massingbird, Andrew Hutchinson, and Louisa Bull. My brother Francis, by his interest in the history of our mother's family, the Bridgemans of Toomdeely, has established our relationship with several soldiers who went from Ireland to fight for France in the wars of Louis XV. As one of them, Winter Bridgeman, exemplifies the type of international professional officer who features widely in what follows, it is to him that I have chosen to dedicate this book. I am deeply grateful to Francis for all the work he has done. My thanks finally to friends at Kilmington, particularly Honor Medlam, Michael and Nesta Gray, Don and Marjorie Davis, and my love as always to my children and children-in-law, Lucy and Brooks Newmark, Thomas, Rose, Matthew and Mary, and to my darling wife Suzanne. Kilmington Manor, June the 9th, 1993. Introduction. I was not fated to be a warrior. A childhood illness left me lame for life in 1948, and I have limped now for 45 years. When, in 1952, I reported for my medical examination for compulsory military service, the doctor who examined legs, he was inevitably the last doctor to examine me that morning, shook his head, wrote something on my form, and told me that I was free to go. Some weeks later, an official letter arrived to inform me that I had been classified permanently unfit for duty in any of the armed forces. Fate nevertheless cast my life among warriors. My father had been a soldier in the First World War. I grew up in the Second, in a part of England where the British and American armies gathering for the D-Day invasion of Europe were stationed. In some ways, I detected that my father's service on the Western Front in 1917-18 had been the most important experience of his life. The spectacle of the preparation for invasion in 1943-4 marked me also. It aroused an interest in military affairs that took root, so that when I went up to Oxford in 1953, I chose military history as my special subject. A special subject was a requirement for a degree, no more than that, so that my involvement in military history might have ended at graduation. The interest, however, had bitten deeper during my undergraduate years, because most of the friends I made at Oxford had, unlike me, done their military service. They made me conscious of having missed something. Most had been officers, and many had served on campaign, for Britain in the early 1950s was disengaging from empire in a series of small colonial wars. Some of my friends had soldiered in the jungles of Malaya or the forests of Kenya. A few, who had served in regiments sent to Korea, had even fought in a real battle. Sober professional lives awaited them, and they sought academic success and the good opinion of tutors as a passport to the future. Yet it was clear to me that the 2 years they had spent in uniform had cast over them the spell of an entirely different world from that they were set on entering. The spell was in part one of experience, of strange places, of unfamiliar responsibility, of excitement, and even of danger. It was also the spell of acquaintance with the professional officers who had commanded them. Our tutors were admired for their scholarship and eccentricities. My contemporaries continued to admire the officers they had known for other qualities altogether, their dash, élan, vitality, and impatience with the everyday. Their names were often mentioned, their characters and mannerisms recalled, their exploits, above all their self-confident brushes with authority, recreated. Somehow I came to feel that I knew these light-hearted warriors, and I certainly wanted to know people like them very badly, if only to flesh out my vision of the warrior's world that, as I laboured over my military historical texts, was slowly taking shape in my mind. When university life came to its end, and my friends departed to become lawyers, diplomats, civil servants, or university tutors themselves, I found that the afterglow of their military years had cast its spell on me. I decided to become a military historian, a foolhardy decision since there were few academic posts in the subject. More quickly than I had any right to expect, however, such a post became vacant at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, Britain's cadet college, and in 1960 I joined the staff. I was 25. I knew nothing about the army. I'd never heard a shot fired in anger. I'd scarcely met a regular officer, and the picture I had of soldiers and soldiering belonged entirely to my imagination. The first term I spent at Sandhurst pitched me headlong into a world for which not even my imagination had prepared me. In 1960, the military staff of the Academy, I belonged to its academic side, was composed, at the senior level, exclusively of men who had fought in the Second World War. The junior officers were almost all veterans of Korea, Malaya, Kenya, Palestine, Cyprus, or any one of another dozen colonial campaigns. Their uniforms were covered with medal ribbons, often of high awards for gallantry. My head of department, a retired officer, wore, on mess evenings, the Distinguished Service Order and the Military Cross with 2 bars, and his distinctions were not exceptional. There were majors and colonels with medals for bravery won at Alamein, Cassino, Arnhem, and Kohima. The history of the Second World War was written in these little strips of silk that they wore so lightly, and its high moments were recorded with crosses and medals, which the bearers scarcely seemed conscious of having been awarded. It was not only the kaleidoscope of medals that entranced me, it was also the kaleidoscope of uniforms and all that they signified. Many of my university contemporaries had brought with them scraps of military glory, regimental blazers, or British warm overcoats. Those who had been cavalry officers continued to wear, with evening dress, the Morocco-topped patent leather boots, slotted at the heel for spurs, that belonged to their Lancer or Hussar uniforms. That had alerted me to the paradox that uniform was not uniform, but that regiments dressed differently. How differently Sandhurst taught me on the first mess evening I spent there. There were Lancers and Hussars in blue and scarlet, but also household cavalrymen crushed by the weight of their gold lace. Riflemen in green, so dark it was almost black, gunners in tight trousers, guardsmen in stiff shirts, Highlanders in 6 different patterns of tartan, Lowlanders in plaid trews, and infantrymen of the county regiments with yellow, white, grey, purple, or buff facings to their jackets. I had thought the army was one army. After that evening I realized it was not. I still had to learn that the outward differences of dress spoke of inward differences of much greater importance. Regiments, I discovered, defined themselves above all by their individuality, and it was their individuality which made them into the fighting organizations whose effectiveness in combat was proclaimed by the medals and crosses I saw all about me. My regimental friends, the ready friendship extended by warriors is one of their most endearing qualities, were brothers in arms, but they were brothers only up to a point. Regimental loyalty was the touchstone of their lives. A personal difference might be forgiven the next day. A slur on the regiment would never be forgotten, indeed would never be uttered, so deeply would such a thing touch